Widowed millionaire finds his daughter with a candy seller, and something unexpected happens. He thought he gave his daughter everything, but he had never seen that smile. On the sidewalk, the girl was sharing sweets with a stranger. When he discovered who the woman was, his world collapsed all at once, and the revealed truth forever changed this family's fate. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. We continue. I promise this will be the best story you'll hear in your life. Richard Mitchell gazed at New York City through the window of his office on the 40th floor. The orange sunset sky painted the skyscrapers with golden hues, a spectacle he barely noticed anymore. His reflection in the bulletproof glass showed a 45-year-old man, graying at the temples, impeccable suit and tired eyes. He had built an empire but lived in an empty fortress. "Mr. Mitchell, the merger documents are ready for signature." His secretary's voice interrupted his thoughts. "Thank you, Christine. You can leave them on the desk." He turned and examined the room. Italian designer furniture, acclaimed works of art, business awards lined up on a fine wood shelf. Everything calculated to impress, to show power. The Mitchell Group had become one of the largest business conglomerates in the country in less than a decade, a success story for the financial papers. His cell phone vibrated. It was a message. From Martha, the housekeeper. "Miss Sophie refuses to eat dinner again. I tried all the dishes she likes. What should I do?" Richard sighed. Sophie, his 12-year-old daughter, was becoming more distant each day. It was as if she were building an increasingly high wall between them, brick by brick, silence by silence. He tried to compensate for Helen's absence with everything money could buy. The best school in New York, ballet lessons, piano, English, French, a life of privilege that many envied. "I'll talk to her when I get home," he replied. He was signing the last documents when his phone rang. It was Carl, his driver. "Sir, I'm waiting, as agreed." "I'm coming down." In the private elevator, Richard adjusted his tie and massaged his temples. The headaches were frequent, especially before sleep when memories of Helen appeared without warning. 6 years had passed since she left them in circumstances he never fully explained to his daughter. "Mommy had to go away," was the phrase he found to tell little Sophie, who was only 6 years old at the time. The black Mercedes awaited him in the parking garage. Carl opened the door and Richard entered without greeting, loosening his tie. "Home, sir?" "Yes, Carl." The car glided silently through the chaotic traffic on Fifth Avenue when something caught Richard's attention. For a moment he thought he saw a familiar face in the crowd. A woman of approximately 40, brown hair tied in a simple bun, modest clothes. His heart raced, but soon he realized it was just his mind playing tricks again. How many times had he imagined seeing Helen in strangers' faces? The phone rang, breaking the spell. "Mitchell." "Richard, this is Victor. We need to talk about the multinationals' proposal. They've increased the offer." Victor Matthews was his partner, but lately his ambitions had been causing friction. Richard sensed that he wanted more power within the company, taking advantage of any sign of weakness. "Tomorrow, Victor, I'm going home." "This is urgent, Richard. We can't miss this opportunity." "Early tomorrow, Victor." He ended the call without waiting for a response. The business world could wait. Sophie couldn't. When he arrived at the mansion on the Upper East Side, the housekeeper was waiting with a worried expression. "How is she?" he asked, handing his jacket to the maid. "Locked in her room since she got home from school." "Barely." "Touched her lunch." "And Rebecca picked her up on time?" "Yes, sir." But Sophie was very quiet, according to the driver. He climbed the marble staircase leading to the upper floor. The corridor, decorated with black and white photographs of American landscapes, seemed longer at night. He stopped at Sophie's bedroom. Joe took a deep breath and knocked softly. "Sophie, may I come in?" Silence. "Sweetheart, it's me. I'm studying, Dad." Her voice sounded distant, almost as if it came from somewhere else, not just from the other side of the door. "We need to talk. Martha said you didn't have dinner." The door opened slowly. Sophie appeared, still wearing the school uniform she hadn't changed out of. Her eyes, so much like her mother's, avoided his. "I'm not hungry." Richard entered the spacious room, decorated in blue and white tones. A canopy bed, a study desk, shelves filled with expensive books and toys, many still, with tags, a golden cage. What happened at school? Today? He asked, trying to sound casual. Nothing. Nothing at all? Your grades are still excellent? Yes. Richard looked around, searching for something to connect them, some topic that could break that invisible barrier. I see there's a school trip next week. To the Museum of Modern Art. Do you want to go? Whatever. Sophie, I'm trying to talk to you. She finally looked at him. About what, Dad? About how you're never here. About how you prefer your company to being with me. The words hit Richard, like precise arrows. It was unfair. Everything he did was for her. That's not true, Sophie. Everything I've built was thinking of you, your future. I don't need a future. I need a present. She picked up a book and pretended to concentrate on it. I need to study now. I have a test tomorrow. Richard felt defeated once again. He nodded and left the room, gently closing the door. In the hallway, he stopped in front of Helen's portrait, hanging on the wall. Her enigmatic smile seemed to hide secrets he never fully deciphered. The next morning, after a restless night, Richard was having coffee alone. Sophie had already left for school without saying goodbye. The housekeeper entered the dining room with a hesitant expression. Mr. Mitchell, I found this in Sophie's uniform pocket when I was going to wash it. She held out a small crumpled paper bag. Inside were some colorful candy wrappers and a handwritten note. I'll bring more tomorrow. They're special like you, the candy lady. What is this? Asked Richard, confused. I don't know, sir, but it's not the first time I've found candy wrappers in her pockets. Something about that simple note aroused an uneasiness in Richard. Who was this candy lady? Why would his daughter be hiding notes? Martha, has Sophie been going out at any time without the nanny or the driver? Not that I know of, sir. She goes to school and comes straight home. But Richard knew his daughter. Behind that silence was a determination she had inherited from him. If Sophie wanted something, she would find a way to get it. Call James, he ordered, referring to his head of personal security. Hours later, in his office, Richard was receiving the preliminary report. Sophie had been seen talking to a woman who sold handmade candies near the school. Nothing alarming, according to James, just a street vendor who seemed to have won the sympathy of several students. Did you get any photos of this woman? Only from a distance, sir. We didn't want to get too close to avoid drawing attention. James showed an image on his phone. A woman from behind, brown hair tied back, wearing simple clothes, sitting on a park bench talking with some children, including Sophie, who was smiling in a way Richard hadn't seen in years. Keep watching, but discreetly. I don't want Sophie to notice. Yes, sir. When James left, Richard remained looking at the enlarged photo on his computer. There was something familiar about that silhouette, something that made his heart inexplicably race. Perhaps it was just paranoia, the result of years of distrust in the corporate world. At the end of that afternoon, he decided to pick up Sophie from school personally. He wanted to see with his own eyes this mysterious candy seller who had managed what he could, not making his daughter smile. The Mercedes parked discreetly across the street. Richard watched through the dark glass as students came out in noisy groups. Sophie appeared, accompanied by two classmates. They walked together until they turned the corner, where the other girls continued straight ahead, and Sophie, looking around as if checking whether she was being observed, changed direction. Follow her, Carl, keep your distance. The driver obeyed, driving the car slowly. Sophie walked for 2 blocks until she reached a small park. She sat on a bench where a woman was arranging small, colorful packages on an outstretched cloth. Richard felt his heart skip a beat when the woman turned to receive Sophie with a warm embrace. Even at a distance, even after 6 years, even with all the changes that time imposes, he would recognize that profile anywhere in the world. "Stop the car, Carl," he ordered, his voice breaking. "Sir, is everything all right?" Richard didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on the scene in front of him, his daughter smiling openly while sharing something with the candy woman, who listened with complete attention as if nothing else existed in the world besides that girl, a type of attention that He, with all his power and money, never managed to offer. And then, when the woman turned her face toward the car, even without being able to see through the dark windows, Richard was certain. Those eyes, that restrained smile, that way of slightly tilting her head. It was Helen. The candy woman was Helen. Richard Mitchell's world collapsed in that moment. His mind was buzzing with questions he couldn't organize. How could Helen be alive? Why was she selling candies on the street when she could be living in luxury? Why had she abandoned her daughter? Why had she abandoned him? And most importantly, why was she now returning in this stealthy way, approaching Sophie without revealing herself? "Carl, go back to the office," he ordered with a trembling voice. "Aren't you going to speak with your daughter, sir?" Not now. During the journey, Richard tried to regain control. He was a man accustomed to making difficult decisions, to keeping calm in billion-dollar negotiations, to facing business crises. But nothing had prepared him for this. He took his cell phone and called his private investigator. "August, I need you urgently. It's about that matter we discussed 6 years ago. The case of Mrs. Helen." The voice on the other end sounded cautious. "Exactly. She's alive, August. I need to know everything. Where she's been, how she survived, why she came back, and especially, who else knew about this?" "I understand, sir. I'll begin immediately." Upon arriving at his office, Richard locked himself in alone. He opened the bottom drawer of his desk, the one he always kept locked, and took out a red folder. Inside were the documents he had reviewed hundreds of times over the years. The medical certificate, confirming Helen's disappearance, the inconclusive police reports, the analyses from experts he had hired. The official version was that Helen had suffered an accident during a solitary trip to their beach house in the Hamptons. The car had been found partially submerged after a heavy storm, but the body never appeared. The searches lasted for weeks, but eventually the authorities declared a presumption of death. Richard never fully accepted this conclusion, but with time the pain gave way to resignation. Now everything was changing again. If Helen was alive, what else was a lie? His cell phone rang. It was Sophie's school. "Mr. Mitchell, this is Christina Oliveira, coordinator at Horizon School. We're concerned because Sophie didn't show up for her last class." "What do you mean?" Panic rose in Richard's throat. "She left the school. According to our cameras, she left during the break between classes. I thought perhaps you had authorized it." "I didn't authorize anything. Don't you control students' exits?" "Mr. Mitchell, Sophie told the inspector that you had sent the driver to pick her up for a medical appointment. Since this has happened before, we didn't suspect." "Find my daughter." Richard hung up, furious. He immediately called James, ordering a search. Then he called Rebecca, Sophie's driver. "Rebecca, is Sophie with you?" "No, sir, I'm waiting for the time to pick her up at 5:30 p.m. as always." Desperation took hold of Richard. Where could Sophie be? The answer came like a flash. With Helen, the candy woman. "Carl, go back to that park now." During the journey, Richard tried to call Sophie's cell phone, but it went straight to voicemail. When they reached the park, there was no sign of the vendor or his daughter. The small bench where they had been sitting was now occupied by an elderly couple. Richard got out of the car, ignoring Carl's protests about security. He approached a florist who had a stand nearby. "Ma'am, did you see a woman who sells candies?" "Here? She was with a girl in a school uniform." The florist observed him suspiciously. "And who are you?" "I'm the girl's father," Richard replied, trying to control his irritation. The woman's expression softened. "Ah, little Sophie's father. Miss Claire left with her about 40 minutes ago. The girl seemed very happy." "Miss Claire? That's her name?" "Yes, Claire, the candy lady. She comes here every day for several months. Makes the most delicious candies in the neighborhood. Everyone likes her." Where did they go? The florist pointed in the direction of a side street. "I think to the cafe on the corner. Miss Claire always has a coffee in the late afternoon." Richard thanked her quickly and headed in the indicated direction. The cafe was small and cozy, with tables on the sidewalk. His heart raced when he spotted Sophie sitting by the window, drinking what appeared to be hot chocolate, laughing at something Helen, now Claire, was telling her. For a moment, he was paralyzed. observing them from a distance. Sophie seemed like a different person, relaxed, happy, without the constant expression of boredom and indifference she displayed at home. Helen was thinner, with wrinkles around her eyes that didn't exist before, less shiny hair, slightly rough hands, marks of a clearly more difficult life than the one she had led by his side. Gathering courage, Richard crossed the street and entered the cafe. The doorbell announced his arrival, making Helen look up. The recognition was instantaneous. First surprise, then fear, finally a silent resignation, as if this moment had been inevitable. "Dad?" Sophie stood up, confused. "What are you doing here?" "The question is, what are you doing here?" "Sophie, the school called me. You lied to leave in the middle of classes." Helen remained seated, eyes fixed on her coffee cup, as if seeking strength in the dark liquid. "I just wanted to spend some time with Miss Claire," Sophie explained, defiant. "She understands me better than anyone." Richard stared at Helen, who finally raised her gaze. "Hello, Richard," she said softly, in a voice he thought he would never hear again. "Sophie, go wait in the car," Richard ordered, without taking his eyes off Helen. "No. I want to stay with Miss Claire." "Sophie, please," Helen intervened gently. "Do what your father asks. I promise we'll talk another day." The girl looked at the two adults, noticing for the first time the strange tension between them. "You know each other?" she asked, confused. Neither answered immediately. It was Helen who finally spoke. "Yes, Sophie, your father and I know each other from a long time ago." Sophie frowned, processing the information. "Why did you never tell me?" "It's complicated, dear, but I promise to explain everything later." Reluctantly, Sophie picked up her backpack. "Do you really promise?" "I promise," Helen replied with a sad smile. When Sophie left, a heavy silence fell over the table. Richard sat in the chair his daughter had vacated. "6 years, Helen," he finally said, his voice a mixture of anger and pain. 6 years thinking. "You were dead." "I know." "Is that all you have to say?" "I know." Helen took a deep breath, like someone gathering strength for a difficult confession. "It wasn't my choice, Richard." "It wasn't your choice?" He had to control himself not to raise his voice. "You faked your own death, abandoned your daughter, and say it wasn't your choice." "That's not what happened." Helen looked around, aware of the other customers. "Can we talk somewhere else?" "No. You're going to explain here and now why you disappeared from our lives and why you're secretly approaching my daughter." "Our daughter," Helen corrected softly. The word "our" hit Richard like a punch. For years he had referred to Sophie as "my daughter," as if he needed to constantly reaffirm that she was all that remained of Helen. "Speak," he insisted. Helen interlaced her fingers, looking at her own hands as if the story was written there. "That trip to the Hamptons, I didn't have any accident. I was taken, Richard." "Taken by whom?" "By your father." The declaration hung in the air like a bomb about to explode. Edward Mitchell, patriarch of the family, had died 4 years ago, from a heart attack. He had always been a severe, manipulative man who never fully approved of Richard's marriage to Helen, daughter of a university professor without wealth or influential connections. "My father? That's absurd, Helen." "He intercepted me on the road with his security guards, said he had proof that I was cheating on you, that he would ruin my reputation if I didn't disappear. He showed manipulated photos, falsified conversations, and you believed him. Why didn't you come to me?" "Because he also threatened Sophie." Helen's voice trembled. "Said he would make sure you got full custody, that I would never see her." Again, "You don't know what your father was capable of, Richard. He had judges in his pocket, politicians, journalists." Richard felt his stomach turn. He knew well his father's power and cruelty, but never imagined he would go so far. What happened after that? "He staged the accident scene. Paid to have my presumed death declared. Gave me money to start over far away on the condition that I never appear again. And you accepted?" The incredulity in Richard's voice was palpable. "Not at first. I resisted, threatened to report him. That's when he showed that he had people watching Sophie at school. He sent me photos of her taken without anyone noticing. Helen paused, swallowing the lump in her throat. I was afraid, Richard. Afraid of what he would do to our daughter to silence me. You could have told me. I would have confronted my father, protected both of you. Helen smiled sadly. You always overestimated your power against him, Richard. At the time, the company was still mostly his. You were financially dependent on him, and he made sure to show me dossiers on each of your weaknesses that he could exploit. Richard ran his hand through his hair, trying to absorb each revelation. So you left. Where to? First to the south, then Peru, Bolivia, working in small businesses, always moving when I felt I might be recognized, always afraid. And now? Why come back right when my father is no longer here to stop you? Helen lowered her eyes. I didn't know he had died. I lived so isolated that the news didn't reach me. I came back to the United States a year ago when the money ran out. I came to New York to try to start over, not knowing what I would find. And you decided to approach Sophie without identifying yourself. I just wanted to see her, Richard. See how she was growing up. I didn't intend to get close, but one day she bought a candy, and we started talking. There was something about her that attracted me, even without knowing she was my daughter. I think blood recognizes blood. She doesn't know who you are. No. To her, I'm just Claire, the candy lady, a friend. Richard stared at her, looking in Helen's eyes for some sign of deception, but found only pain and fatigue. Why should I believe you now? Helen opened her simple purse and took out a yellowed envelope. Because I have proof. Your father was meticulous, Richard. He documented everything. He gave me these papers when he sent me away, a sick kind of insurance in case I thought of coming back. They are agreements signed by him with people who participated in the scheme. Richard took the envelope with trembling hands. Inside, he found documents with the letterhead of shell companies he knew belonged to his father, signatures he recognized from old family friends, dates that coincided with Helen's disappearance. My God, he murmured, feeling nauseated. Why are you showing me this now? Because Sophie deserves to know the truth. I don't want to replace what you have or cause more pain. I just want to be part of her life again, even if only as a friend. Richard put away the documents, trying to organize his thoughts. And what do you expect me to do with all this? Whatever. Is best for Sophie, Helen answered simply. Richard's cell phone vibrated. It was a message from Carl. Miss Sophie is restless in the car, asks if she can come back. I need to go, said Richard, getting up. Sophie is waiting. What will you tell her? The question hung in the air like an unspoken sentence. I don't know yet. I need to think, verify this information. I understand. Helen nodded, resigned. May I ask one thing? What? Don't keep her away from me while you decide. She enjoys the time we spend together. It's the only time I see her truly happy. The words hit Richard like a cruel mirror, reflecting his own failure to connect with his daughter. He nodded stiffly and left the cafe without looking back, carrying the weight of the revelations and the envelope that rewrote the entire story he believed to be true. In the car, Sophie was waiting with a defiant expression. Who is she to you? She asked directly. Richard sighed, looking at his daughter, who had the same penetrating eyes as Helen. It's complicated, Sophie. I'm tired of hearing that. Every adult says it's complicated when they don't want to explain the truth. You're right, Richard signaled Carl to start driving. Miss Claire is a person from my past, someone I knew a long time ago. Were you friends? Richard looked out the window, seeing his distorted reflection in the dark glass. We were much more than friends. The next morning, Richard didn't go to the office. He called Christine, his secretary, and asked her to reschedule all his appointments. He needed time to digest Helen's revelations and especially to decide what he would do with that devastating truth. Sophie had asked countless questions on the way home, but Richard managed to answer only vaguely, promising they would talk. Better when he was ready. The girl, frustrated, locked herself in her room when they arrived home and refused to have dinner. Now, sitting in his private office in the mansion, Richard examined each document from the envelope. They were compelling evidence of his father's manipulation. Contracts with private detectives, receipts for payments to police officers, even an agreement with the doctor who signed the presumption of death report. Edward Mitchell had meticulously planned everything, leaving no loose ends, except for the fact that he had kept records of his own crimes. The phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. It was August, the investigator. "Mr. Mitchell, I have some preliminary information." "I'm listening." "The woman who presents herself as Claire Santos rented a small apartment in Brooklyn 8 months ago. Before that, she worked as a waitress in Pittsburgh for approximately a year. I managed to track earlier movements indicating passages through Peru and Bolivia. The information matched Helen's account. Any suspicious activity, connections to criminals, extortion, anything like that?" "Absolutely nothing, sir. She leads a simple life, works selling handmade candies, pays her bills on time. She attends a local church on Sundays. From the records I've obtained, she seems to be a discreet person, without vices or dubious associations." Richard felt a mixture of relief and anguish. Part of him wished to discover that Helen was lying, that there was some obscure scheme behind her return. It would be easier to maintain the anger, the resentment. "Keep investigating, August. I want to know about her every movement in the last 6 years." "Yes, sir. One more thing. I found records of regular bank transfers from your father's personal account to an account in the Cayman Islands, starting exactly in the week of Mrs. Helen's disappearance and ending 1 month before his death." Another confirmation. Edward Mitchell had bought Helen's disappearance. "Thank you, August." After hanging up, Richard opened the desk drawer and took out a photo album. Images of a time that seemed to belong to another life. Him and Helen. At her graduation, at the inauguration of the first branch of the company, at the hospital holding newborn Sophie. Genuine smiles, plans for the future, a family that promised happiness. All destroyed by the ambition and sick control of Edward Mitchell. A light knock on the door interrupted his reflections. "Come in." It was Martha, the housekeeper. "Sir, Miss Sophie is still locked in her room. She wouldn't have breakfast and says she's not going to school today." "Leave her, Martha. Notify the school that she's indisposed." The housekeeper hesitated at the door. "Sir, forgive my intrusion, but did something happen? The girl has been very upset since yesterday." Richard considered the question. Martha had been with them for more than 10 years, knew the family's habits, had helped raise Sophie after Helen's disappearance. "Sit down, Martha. I need to ask you something important, and I want the truth." The woman obeyed, visibly nervous. "Did you ever suspect that Helen might be alive?" The housekeeper paled, a sign Richard didn't miss. "What do you know, Martha?" "Sir, I just suspected. I never had proof." "Suspected based on what?" Martha wrung her hands in her apron. "Once, a few months after the lady's disappearance, I found Mr. Edward in the office talking on the phone. He didn't see me. He was saying something like, 'Stay away as agreed, and everything will be fine.' When he finished the call, he seemed satisfied, like someone who solves a problem. Why did you never tell me this?" "Mr. Edward saw me right after. He asked how long I had been there, said that if I commented anything about his private calls, I would be dismissed immediately and would never get a job in New York again." "You know how influential he was?" Richard nodded. He knew well his father's intimidating tactics. "Is there anything else you should tell me, Martha?" The housekeeper hesitated again. "After Mr. Edward passed, I found a box in his room while we were arranging his belongings. There were photographs of a woman who looked very much like Mrs. Helen, but in different places, with a different appearance. I wasn't sure if it was her. Mr. Victor saw the photos too, and said he would take care of the matter." "Victor?" Richard felt his blood freeze. "Victor Matthews, my partner." "Yes, sir. He came to help with your father's documents and found the box with me. He said it was better not to disturb you with that they were probably just coincidences. The pieces were starting to fit together. Victor was Edward's protégé, always close to old Mitchell, sharing his secrets, his strategies. If anyone besides his father knew the truth about Helen, it would be Victor." "Thank you, Martha. You may go." When he was alone, Richard picked up the phone and called Victor. "We need to talk, now." 2 hours later, Victor Matthews arrived at the mansion. Tall, elegant, always impeccably dressed, he carried the confidence of someone who knows more than he shows. Richard received him in the library, an isolated room where important conversations happened away from curious ears. "To what do I owe the urgency, Richard? We have the meeting with the Japanese investors tomorrow, and we still haven't reviewed the presentation." "Sit down, Victor." Richard's tone left no room for distractions. "I want you to tell me about the photographs you found among my father's belongings." Victor maintained a neutral expression, but a slight tremor in his hand. As he adjusted his tie betrayed his nervousness. "I don't know what you're talking about. Don't insult my intelligence. Martha told me about the box with photos of Helen that you both found after my father's death." Victor adjusted himself in the armchair, evaluating his options. Finally, he sighed. "Your father was a cautious man, Richard. He kept files on people he considered threats to the family business. And my wife was a threat? In his view, yes. Edward always believed that Helen married you out of interest, that one day she would try to take part of the control of the company. That's ridiculous. Helen never showed interest in the business." "Not to your eyes, Richard, but your father saw enemies in every corner." Victor made a calculated pause. "The photos were just part of the surveillance he maintained on her, nothing that indicated she was alive after the accident." Richard observed his partner carefully, noticing the small drops of sweat that were beginning to form on his forehead. "You're lying, Victor. The photos were from after the disappearance, and you knew that." Victor held his gaze for a few seconds before giving in. "What do you want me to say, Richard? That your father orchestrated your wife's disappearance? That he paid for her to vanish? That he preferred to destroy your family rather than allow her to remain by your side? And if it's true, what do you intend to do? Destroy the legacy we built together because of something that happened 6 years ago and cannot be changed?" The confirmation, even if indirect, hit Richard like lightning. Until that moment, part of him still hoped that everything was a mistake, a distorted interpretation of the facts. "You knew. All this time you knew Helen was alive and didn't tell me anything." "I protected you, Richard. Edward made me swear I would never tell. He said it would be better for everyone, especially for Sophie. Better for Sophie to grow up without her mother. Better for me to live believing that the woman I loved was dead." Victor stood up, gesturing emphatically. "Think about what would happen if the truth came to light. The scandal would destroy the company's reputation, years of hard work thrown away. Investors would flee, stocks would plummet. So it's about money, about the damn company." Richard felt his anger grow. "My family was destroyed because of profits and corporate reputation." "Don't be naive. Everything is about money and power, Richard. Your father understood that. I understand that. You're the only one who insists on mixing feelings with business." Richard stepped forward, threatening. "I want you to leave my house now. And starting tomorrow, prepare for a complete audit of all your activities in the company. If I find any irregularity, any ethical deviation, no matter how small, I will destroy you, Victor." His partner paled. "You can't do that. We've been partners for more than 15 years. "I can and I will. Now leave before I forget that I once considered you a friend." When Victor left, slamming the door hard, Richard felt simultaneously exhausted and determined. Years of lies, manipulations, and betrayals were coming to light, revealing the rot beneath the polished surface of his life. His cell phone vibrated. It was a message from Sophie. "I'm going to see Miss Claire. Don't try to stop me." Richard ran to his daughter's room, only to find it empty. The window was open, the sheet tied. To form an improvised rope. On top of the bed, a note. "She understands me. You only care about your work." Desperate, Richard called James, ordering him to locate Sophie immediately. Then he called the number Helen had given him at the cafe. "She's coming to you," Emo said as soon as Helen answered. "Sophie ran away from home." "My God," Helen's voice sounded worried. "I haven't seen her today. I'm at home preparing candies for tomorrow." "Give me your address. I'll meet you there." Helen hesitated only a second before providing the address of her small apartment in Brooklyn. Richard left hurriedly, driving himself. ignoring traffic signals and irritated honks. The building where Helen lived was simple, without an elevator. He ran up the 3 floors until he found apartment 302. Before he could knock, the door opened. Helen looked as worried as he was, her tied hair disheveled, red eyes. "She's not here, Richard. I called all the places we usually go together. I need to find her." Richard ran his hands over his face, trying to control the panic. "It's all my fault. She realized I was hiding something about you." Helen invited him in. The apartment was small, clean, and organized. In the kitchen, pots, with candies in preparation. In the living room, a simple table covered with colorful packaging for the candies. "Sit down," Helen offered. "Let's think together about where she might be." Richard noticed for the first time how tired Helen looked. It wasn't just the worry of the moment. It was years of solitary struggle, forced exile, separation from her daughter. "I read the documents," he said abruptly. "I also talked to Victor. He confirmed everything." Helen nodded silently. "What do you intend to do?" she asked. "I don't know," admitted Richard. "Part of me wants to expose everything, destroy my father's memory, sue everyone involved. Another part just wants to find Sophie and protect her from more suffering." Helen's phone rang, interrupting the conversation. She answered quickly. "Sophie, thank God, where are you?" Helen signaled to Richard, who came closer to listen. "We're very worried. Your father is here with me." Sophie's voice sounded choked with crying. "You're lying to me. Everyone lies. I found out everything." "What did you discover, dear?" asked Helen, trying to stay calm. "I found photos of you on Grandpa's computer. You're not just a friend of my dad's. You're my mom, aren't you? My mom that everyone said had died." Richard and Helen exchanged panicked looks. How had Sophie accessed Edward's computer? "Sophie, where are you?" insisted Richard. "Let's talk about this in person." "I'm at Grandpa's house," Sophie answered between sobs. "I came to get the tablet he gave me for my birthday. Nobody comes here since he passed away. I found photos on his computer, many photos of Miss Claire, but calling her Helen. And there were letters talking about making her disappear. Edward Mitchell's mansion had been closed after his death, with vague plans to transform it into the headquarters of the foundation that would bear his name. No one would have imagined that Sophie would go there. "We're coming to you, Sophie," Helen said firmly. "Don't leave there, please." "Are you really my mum?" Sophie's voice was now small, vulnerable, like the child she still was despite all her pose of maturity. Helen looked at Richard, asking for silent permission. He nodded, feeling his eyes water. "Yes, Sophie, I am your mother, and I never ever wanted to abandon you." A loud sob came from the other end of the line. "Why didn't you tell me? Why did you pretend to be someone else?" "It's complicated. Dear, but we'll explain everything, I promise. Just stay where you are. We're leaving right now." After hanging up, Helen and Richard rushed to the car. During the journey, neither spoke much. The weight of the revelations, the urgency of the moment, the concern for Sophie, all this created a dense atmosphere between them. Edward Mitchell's old mansion was an imposing construction in Westchester, surrounded by a garden now poorly maintained. The main gate was locked, but Sophie apparently knew a side entrance that she used when visiting her grandfather in secret. They found her sitting on the main staircase of the house, hugging a picture frame. Upon seeing them, she stood up, hesitant. Her red eyes went from Richard to Helen, as if trying to decipher a riddle too complex for her age. Helen stepped forward, visibly trembling. "Sophie," she murmured, her voice breaking with emotion. The girl held up the picture frame she was holding. It was a photo of Richard and Helen in the hospital, holding a newborn baby. "Is it true? Are you my mom that everyone said died in an accident?" Helen nodded, tears freely flowing down her face. "Yes. Sophie, I'm your mother." Sophie looked at her father, seeking confirmation. "Why did you lie to me? Why did you say she had died?" Richard approached, kneeling to be at his daughter's height. "I believed that too, Sophie. For 6 years, I thought your mother had left us forever. I only discovered the truth yesterday when I saw you two together." "I don't understand," Sophie frowned, confused. "If nobody knew, why did she leave?" Helen stepped forward, cautious. Your grandfather, Sophie. It was he who kept me away from you both. He made me leave." "Grandpa?" Sophie seemed incredulous. "But he gave me presents, took me for walks. Your grandfather thought he was protecting you and your father," Helen explained softly. "He believed I wasn't good enough for the Mitchell family." Sophie looked again at the photo in her hands, then at the two adults in front of her. Slowly, she extended her hand to Helen. Can I hug you?" Helen sobbed, unable to contain her emotion. "Of course you can, my love. I've waited for this moment every day for the last 6 years." Sophie ran into her mother's arms, and the two embraced as if they wanted to recover all the lost time in a single gesture. Richard observed the scene, feeling a confused mixture of emotions: relief, sadness, anger at his father, guilt for not having realized sooner, and something else he couldn't name yet. Perhaps hope. After a long moment, Sophie pulled away, a little looking at her mother with renewed curiosity. "So the candies were just a disguise?" Helen smiled through tears. "At first, yes, it was a way to be near you without raising suspicions, but I ended up discovering that I really enjoy making them. Each color, each flavor. It was a small message of love I could give you when I couldn't say who I was." Sophie turned to her father. "And now, what's going to happen?" Richard looked at Helen, then at his daughter, aware that they were at a decisive moment, a turning point that would forever change the course of their lives. "That depends on the three of us, Sophie, on choices we need to make together." The girl nodded, surprisingly serious for someone so young. "I want us to be together, the three of us." A gentle breeze stirred the leaves of the abandoned garden, as if nature was responding to the simple and profound desire of a child. Helen extended her hand to Richard, who hesitated only an instant before accepting it. The three remained there, forming an imperfect, fragile but real circle. Much more real than the empire of appearances that Edward Mitchell had built and tried to protect at any cost. The following weeks were a whirlwind of emotions and adjustments for the three. Richard decided to be open with Sophie, telling her the whole truth in a way appropriate to her age. He didn't hide his grandfather's manipulation, but was careful to explain that, despite his mistakes, Edward Mitchell believed he was protecting the family in his distorted way. Helen temporarily moved into one of the apartments that Richard maintained in downtown. It was a provisional solution that respected the time needed for everyone to adapt to the new reality. Sophie spent afternoons with her mother after school, gradually rediscovering the woman behind the candy cellar. However, the corporate storm was just beginning. Victor, feeling threatened by the investigation promised by Richard, decided to attack first. In an emergency board meeting, he presented a dossier on Helen's return, suggesting that Richard was emotionally unstable and unable to lead the company at such a crucial moment. "Gentlemen, I understand the shock of this revelation," Richard said calmly to the board members. "Indeed, my ex-wife, whom we all believed had died 6 years ago, is alive. However, this does not affect my leadership capacity." "Richard," Victor intervened with false concern, "no one questions your competence. We're just worried about the potential scandal. If the press discovers that Helen Mitchell is alive, that she was removed by your own father, imagine the headlines. Investors will flee." Richard observed the faces around the table, some genuinely concerned, others clearly aligned with Victor, waiting for an opportunity to advance in the corporate hierarchy. "Let's clarify something." Richard adjusted his tie, maintaining his composure. "I'm not asking permission to reunite my family. I'm communicating a fact. As for the supposed scandal, it will only exist if we treat this as a dirty secret. I intend to handle the matter with transparency and dignity." "This is madness," exclaimed Victor, losing his mask of concern. "Think about the stock value, your father's reputation." "My father," Richard responded firmly, "made decisions that destroyed lives. I don't intend to follow his example. From today, the Mitchell Group will be guided by different values." The meeting ended with a divided board. Although Richard maintained majority control, he would need allies to face the turbulence that was announcing itself. At home, He found Helen and Sophie in the kitchen, preparing the famous, colorful candies together. The scene, so domestic, so normal, contrasted drastically with the hostile environment of the boardroom. "How did it go?" asked Helen, noticing his tense expression. "Predictable. Victor is trying to use the situation to push me out. Half the board is hesitant, the other half is with him." Sophie, with hands covered in colored sugar, looked worriedly at her father. "Are they going to take the company from you, Dad?" Richard smiled, touched by his daughter's concern. "Don't worry about that, Sophie. It's just business." "But you built all that. You always told me it was your legacy to me." Richard approached, helping her shape a candy. "You know, Sophie, I spent years believing that my father's legacy was that company. That my value as a man was in the empire I built. Now I realize there are much more important things." Helen observed the interaction with a contained smile. Gradually, Richard was rediscovering the connection with his daughter, finding words that previously seemed impossible. That night, after Sophie went to sleep, Richard and Helen talked at length on the porch. The New York sky, rarely starry due to pollution, seemed exceptionally clear. "What do you intend to do about Victor?" asked Helen. "I'll confront him openly. I have enough evidence that he collaborated with my father to remove you. If necessary, I'll use it." "Are you sure exposing all this publicly will also affect your father's memory, the family's reputation?" Richard reflected for a moment, observing the city lights. "You know what I discovered in these last few weeks? That reputation is like sugar. It shines, impresses, but has no real substance. What matters is what we build when no one is looking." Helen smiled, recognizing the man she had fallen in love with years ago, before the obsession with his father's legacy transformed him. "That reminds me of the Richard I knew in college, the one who wanted to change the world, not just make money." "That Richard still exists," he admitted. "He just got buried under layers of expectations and appearances." They remained in silence for a few minutes, appreciating the rare tranquility. "Sophie wants us to move to your house," Helen finally said. "What do you think about that?" "I think it's too soon. We need to give time to time, Richard. We can't simply pretend that 6 years didn't happen." He nodded, understanding. "I agree, but perhaps we can find a middle ground, some new place that doesn't carry the memories of my father's mansion or the apartment we had before." "A fresh start," Helen smiled. "Exactly. A fresh start for the E. 3 of us." In the following days, the corporate pressure intensified. Strategic leaks to the specialized press suggested instability in the leadership of the Mitchell Group. The stocks began to fall. Victor mobilized allies, preparing for a vote of confidence in the next board meeting. Richard, however, had a plan. He invited Mark Bueno, an old friend and respected economic journalist, for a private lunch. "I want to tell my story, Mark, all of it. No filters, no edited versions." "Are you sure, Richard? Once this is published, there's no going back." Enough of secrets and manipulations. My family deserves the truth, and so do I." The interview was published on a Sunday, occupying 6 pages of the economics section of the country's most influential newspaper. The title was simple but impactful: "The Truth About the Mitchells." Richard spared no details. His father's manipulation, the forced separation, Helen's suffering, the years of lies. He also spoke about redemption, about the chance to rebuild a family shattered by greed and control. "My father believed he was protecting a legacy," he declared in the interview. "But what legacy is worth a child's happiness? What empire justifies destroying a family? I'm not here to judge Edward Mitchell. He's no longer among us to defend himself. I'm here to correct the mistakes that were made and create a new path for the Mitchell Group." The reaction was immediate. Social media exploded with divided opinions. Some criticized Richard for exposing his father's memory. Others praised his courage in confronting the family's toxic past. The most pragmatic questioned the impact on business. On Monday, to the surprise of many, the company's stocks rose. Investors apparently valued the transparency and humanization of a business figure previously seen as cold and calculating. At the company headquarters, Victor was waiting for Richard with a furious expression. Have you gone completely mad? Exposing our family like that? Our family, Richard laughed without humor. You were never part of the family, Victor. You were just another pawn on my father's board. I'll destroy you for this, threatened Victor. I've already mobilized. Half the board. By the end of the week, you'll be out. Richard placed a folder on the table. Before you try anything, take a look at this. They're copies of the documents my father kept about your participation in the scheme against Helen. There are also some extras about certain irregularities of yours that he monitored. Victor paled as he leafed through the documents. This is blackmail. No, Victor. It's justice. You have two options. Quietly resign from your position and sell your shares to me at a fair price, or face not only public opinion, but also a criminal process. You wouldn't do that. You would destroy the company you love so much. That's the difference between us, Victor. I discovered that there are things I love much more. 3 days later, Victor Matthews announced his resignation due to personal reasons and the sale of his stake in the Mitchell Group. The transition was surprisingly smooth. At home, the atmosphere was also beginning to change. Sophie, initially confused with all the media exposure, now seemed lighter, as if an invisible weight had been removed from her shoulders. People at school are talking about us, she commented during dinner. Some parents don't want their children to hang out with me. Does that bother you? Asked Helen, concerned. Sophie shrugged, surprisingly mature. A little, but Mariana, my best friend, said that our family's story is like a soap opera, only real, and that I'm very lucky to have gotten my mom back. Richard and Helen exchanged emotional looks. And what do you think? Asked Richard. I think she's right, Sophie smiled. I am lucky. A few weeks later, Richard surprised Helen and Sophie by arriving home earlier than usual. I have a proposal for you two, he announced, visibly excited. I found a house. A house? Repeated Helen. At the beach in the Hamptons, not too big but comfortable, with a wonderful garden where we can plant whatever we want, and a spacious kitchen perfect for making candies. Sophie jumped with excitement. Are we moving to the beach? Not exactly, explained Richard. We still have our lives here in New York, but we can spend weekends there, vacations, holidays, a place just for us, to start over as a family. Helen seemed emotional. The Hamptons, precisely where everything was interrupted, completed Richard. I thought it was symbolic. We can create new memories there, without ghosts from the past. On the first weekend in the new house, the three worked together to organize it. Sophie chose the colors for her room, Helen planned the kitchen layout, and Richard assembled the furniture. It was a different dynamic than they had in New York, where everything was done by employees and professional decorators. I never imagined seeing you with a screwdriver in hand, joked Helen, watching Richard struggle with a bookshelf. There are many things we never imagined, he replied, smiling. Like I never imagined that one day I would make handmade candies. The next morning, the three walked on the deserted beach. Sophie ran ahead, looking for shells and small treasures brought by the sea. Richard and Helen walked side by side, still maintaining a respectful but comfortable distance. Richard, Helen broke the silence, now we need to talk about the future. I'm listening. The interview you gave, the public exposure of our story, it will affect Sophie as she grows up. People will always remember, always ask. Richard nodded, thoughtful. I know, but I prefer that she grows up with the truth, however difficult it may be, than with comfortable lies. My father chose the path of perfect appearances, and see where that led us. You're right, agreed Helen. I'm just worried about the weight we're placing on her. Sophie is stronger than we imagine, stronger than I was for sure. They observed their daughter in the distance, laughing as she ran from the waves, lapping at the sand. There was a lightness in her that didn't exist before. There's something else I need to tell you, continued Helen. I received a proposal to open an artisanal candy store at Central Mall. That's wonderful. Richard seemed genuinely happy. When did you receive the proposal? Yesterday. A customer who regularly buys my candies is a marketing manager there. She tasted the sweets, was impressed, and called me for a meeting. And will you accept? Helen hesitated. I don't know. I fear that people will only be interested because of the story, you know. The resurrected ex-wife of businessman Richard Mitchell opening a candy store. Richard stopped walking, turning to her. Helen, your candies are truly special. You have a genuine talent. If people are initially attracted by curiosity, they'll stay for the quality of what you do. Helen smiled, touched by the support. Thank you for that. Besides, he continued, I have a suggestion. Why not use the Mitchell name in the business? Not as a reference to me or the company, but as a way to reclaim the name that is also yours by right. To transform something that was used to hurt you into something that now strengthens you. The idea caught Helen by surprise. Mitchell Candies? I don't know if I'm ready for that. Think about it. The name is as much yours as it is mine, and Sophie would be proud to see her mother transforming a symbol of corporate power into something sweet and accessible to everyone. Sophie came, running back, interrupting the conversation. She held in her hands a perfect shell, pink and shiny. Look what I found, isn't it beautiful? It really is, agreed Helen, bending down to look closer. What are you going to do with it? I'm going to keep it to remember this day. Our first day at the beach together, as a real family. The simplicity and depth of the response moved both adults. Sophie, in her childlike wisdom, had perfectly defined what that moment meant. Back in New York, the changes continued. Richard implemented a restructuring in the Mitchell Group, prioritizing ethical and transparent business practices. He created a foundation to support families separated by circumstances beyond their control, a project that Sophie followed with special interest. Helen, after much reflection, accepted the mall's proposal. Mitchell Candies opened its doors 3 months later, with a line that doubled down the corridor on opening day. Her colorful candies, now presented in elegant packaging, became an immediate success. More than a business, the store represented her reintegration into the world that had been denied to her for so long. Sophie flourished at school, overcoming the phase of gossip and morbid curiosity. When questioned about her family history, she responded with surprising confidence. My mom never really abandoned me. Even when she was far away, she found a way to come back to me. On a Sunday afternoon, almost a year after the reunion, the three were at the beach house. Richard watched from the porch as Helen taught Sophie how to make a new candy recipe with orange blossom essence. The scene was simple, everyday, but loaded, with a meaning he could never fully express in words. Helen raised her eyes and saw him watching. She smiled, that smile he thought he had lost forever, and gestured for him to join them. Richard hesitated only an instant before accepting the invitation. In the small kitchen by the sea, far from corporate offices and sensationalist headlines, Richard Mitchell finally understood the true meaning of success. It wasn't the financial empire he had built, nor the fearful respect his name evoked in business circles. It was that moment, hands dirty with sugar, spontaneous laughter, the feeling of belonging that no bank account could buy. Try it, Dad, said Sophie, offering a freshly molded candy. Richard accepted the sweet, feeling the sugary flavor slowly dissolve in his mouth. It was sweet, yes, but with a complexity of flavors that revealed the care of its preparation. It's perfect, he declared. That's because we made it together, Sophie responded naturally. Everything is better when we do it together. Helen and Richard exchanged glances over their daughter's head. They didn't need words to express what they felt. The path to reconciliation was still long, with scars that might never completely disappear. But they were following it together, step by step, building not an empire of appearances, but something much more valuable, a true home, where love didn't need disguises or justifications. You know, said Richard, breaking the silence, I think I finally understood what my father never comprehended. What? Asked Helen. That the true legacy isn't in the buildings we construct or the fortunes we accumulate. It's in moments like this, in the memories we create together, in the lives we touch. Sophie, with the wisdom that sometimes only children possess, nodded solemnly, and in the candies we share. The three laughed together, a sound that filled the small kitchen and spread throughout the house, definitely chasing away the last ghosts of the past. Outside, the sea continued its eternal movement of coming and going, like life, which sometimes takes people away only to return them later, transformed by the journey, stronger because of the separation, more grateful for the reunion. The end of the story. Dear listeners, we hope that the story of Richard, Helen, and Sophie has deeply touched your hearts. To continue this emotional journey, we've prepared a special playlist with equally engaging stories that explore family bonds and the new beginnings that life presents us. You can find it by clicking on the link to the left of the screen. If this narrative moved you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and leave your like on the video. Every day we bring unique stories that explore the complexity of life and the second chances that deserve to be celebrated.